Hi there, this is Kim with Lily Patch Quilts. Today I'm going to show you how I put the binding on my mini bolt mini quilt. You can also find the full printable version on my blog, and I will leave the link below. To start with, my strip is 2¼ inches by the width of fabric. I take one end of the sewn strip and I fold it into a triangle, and then I press the fabric strip wrong sides together all the way to the end. Now trim 1/4 inch away from the fold, and then start placing your binding strip halfway down on your quilt with the folded tip as your starting point, and sew about 3 to 4 inches from that starting point. Sew all the way down to the first corner and stop sewing 1/4 inch before the edge. Turn your quilt to begin sewing on the next side. Backstitch to the raw edge and leave your needle down. Lift up your presser foot and pull the quilt out to just enough to clear the presser foot. Take the binding strip and fold up towards the back, forming a diagonal shape. And then now you'll fold down over that diagonal fold that you just created. Make sure to line up the binding on both raw edges of the quilt, and then continue sewing and repeating these steps at each corner of the quilt. I'm almost at the end of my binding strip. I'm going to stop sewing right where I started in the beginning and backstitch, and then I'm going to pull the quilt away from the presser foot, and just as I did in the beginning, I'm going to fold the end to form a triangle, and making that crease to use as a guide, I'm going to trim 1/4 inch away from that, and then I'm going to take the end of that binding strip. I'm going to tuck it into the starting point. On this tutorial, I did not pin it in place, but it is best to pin your beginning and ending binding strips together to hold it in place as you sew, to prevent it from getting any puckers or tucks. And then you just sew all the way to the beginning of where you started your stitching. At this point, you're pretty much done, and you can fold your binding strip over to the back and then hand sew it in place. But I usually like to hand sew the right side of my binding strip together. It really doesn't matter. This is just preference, because once you sew the binding strip to the back, that area where the beginning and ending of the binding strip attaches together, it will stay nice and secure. I just like to do this. It's just my preference. And so once you're done with that, you just sew the binding strip to the back. Now I like to hand sew my binding strip on the back side, but you could also machine bind it by just stitching the binding down with the sewing machine. So when I get to the corners, I fold it at an angle to form a mitered corner, and then to secure it in place, I just use a clip. So once I'm done clipping my binding in place, I usually just take short stitches and sew it all the way around to finish my binding. Once I get back to the beginning of my binding, I take a couple of stitches to secure the thread in place, and then I just run the needle through the quilt to bury the thread a little bit, and then just trim it That way it buries the thread, I don't see the knot or anything, and it looks really nice. So that's all I have for my binding tutorial today. Thank you so much for watching. I will have the link below so that you can go directly to the tutorial, and there is a printable version on there that you can download.